Hi, I'm going to be reading this book series, Little Women, the collection by Louisa May Alcott. There are 4 books in the series. I'll be beginning with Little Women. Preface. Go then, my little book, and show to all that entertain, and bid thee welcome shall, what thou dost keep shut up in thy breast, and wish what thou dost show them may be blessed. To them for good, may them who choose to be pilgrims better by far than thee or me. Tell them of mercy, she is one, who early hath her pilgrimage begun. Yea, yet young damsels learn of her prize, the world which is to come, and be so wise. For little tripping maids may follow God along the ways which saintly feet have trod. Chapter 1. Playing Pilgrims. Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents, grumbled Joe, lying on the rug. It's so dreadful to be poor, sighed Meg, looking down at her old dress. I don't think it's fair for some girls to have plenty of pretty things and other girls nothing at all, added little Amy, with an injured sniff. We've got father and mother and each other, said Beth, contentedly from her corner. The 4 young faces on which the firelight shone brightened at the cheerful words, but then darkened again as Joe said sadly, Well, we haven't got father, and shall not have him for a long time. She didn't say perhaps never, but each silently added it, thinking of father far away where the fighting was. Nobody spoke for a minute. Then Meg said in an altered tone, You know, the reason Mother proposed not having any presents this Christmas was because it's going to be a hard winter for everyone, and she thinks we ought not to spend money for pleasure when men are suffering in the army. We can't do much, but we can make our little sacrifices, and we ought to do it gladly. But I'm afraid I don't, and Meg shook her head as she thought regretfully of all the pretty things she wanted. But I don't think the little we should spend would do any good. We each got $1 and the army wouldn't be helped much by giving that. I agree not to expect anything from Mother or you, but I do want to buy Undine and Centrum for myself. I've wanted it so long, said Joe, who was a bookworm. I plan to spend mine on music, said Beth with a sigh, which no one heard, but the hearth brush and kettle holder. I shall get a nice box for Faber drawing pencils. I really need them, said Amy. Mother didn't say anything about our money, and she won't wish us to give up everything. Let's each buy what we want and have a little fun. I'm sure we work hard enough to earn it, cried Joe, examining the heels of her shoes in a manner. I know I do, teaching those tiresome children nearly all day when I'm longing to be at home by myself, said Meg. You don't have such a hard time as I do, said Joe. How would you like to be shut up for hours with a nervous, fussy old lady who keeps you trotting and is never satisfied and worries until you're ready to fly out the window or box her ears? It's naughty to fret, but I do think washing dishes and keeping tidy is the worst work in the world. It makes me cross, and my hands get so stiff, and I can't practice well. And Beth looked at her rough hands with a sigh. I don't believe any of you suffer as I do, said Amy, for you don't have to go to school with impertinent girls who plague you if you don't know your lessons and laugh at your dresses and label your father if he isn't rich and insult you when your nose isn't nice. If you mean libel, I'd say so, not talking about labels as if Papa was a pickle bottle, Joe laughed. I know what I mean, and you don't need to be satirical about it. What proper use of good words to improve your vocabulary, said Amy with dignity. Don't peck at one another, children. Don't you wish we had the money Papa lost when we were little? Dear me, how happy we would be if we had no worries, said Meg, who could remember better days. You said the other day you thought you were a deal happier than the King children, for they were fighting and fretting all the time because of their money. So I did, Beth. Well, I think we are, though we have work, to make fun of ourselves, for we are a pretty jolly set, as Joe would say. Joe does use those kind of words, said Amy, with a reproving look for a long figure stretched on the rug. Joe immediately sat up, put her hands in her pockets, and began to whistle. Don't, Joe, it's so boyish. That's why I do it. I detest rude, unladylike girls. I hate niminy-piminy chits. Birds in the little nest agree, sang Beth, the peacemaker, with such a funny face that both sharp voices softened to laugh, and the pecking ended for a time. Really, girls, you both are to be blamed, said Meg, beginning to lecture the elder sisterly fashion. You were old enough to leave off the boyish tricks and behave better, Josephine. It didn't matter so much when you were a little girl, but now you're tall, and turn up your hair. You should remember that you're a young lady. Am not, and if turning up my hair makes me one, I'll wear it in 2 tails till I'm 20, said Jo, pulling off her net and shaking down her mane. I hate to think I gotta grow up and be Miss March and wear long gowns and look prim like a China Aster. It's bad enough to be a girl anyways. I like boy games and to work and manners. I get over my disappointment of not being a boy, and it's worse now than ever. I'm dying to go and fight with Papa, and I can only stay home and knit like a poky old woman. Jo shook the blue army sock until needles rattled like castanets, and her ball bounded across the room. Poor Jo, it's too bad, but it can't be helped. So you must try to be content with making your name boyish and playing brother to us girls, said both, stroking the rough knee at the head of her knee with her hand, with all the dishwashing and dusting. As for you, Amy, continued Meg, you are altogether too particular and prim. Your airs are funny now, but you'll grow up an affected little goose, if you don't take care. I like your nice manners and refined ways of speaking when you don't try to be elegant, but your absurd words are just as bad as Jo's slang. If Jo's a tomboy and Amy's a goose, what am I? Said Beth, ready to share in the lecture. You are a dear, and nothing else, answered Meg. No one contradicted her, for the mouse was the pet of the family. As young readers like to know how people look, we will take this moment to give them a little sketch of the 4 sisters who sat knitting away in the twilight, while the December snow fell quietly without, the fire crackling within. It was a comfortable old room, though the carpet was faded and the furniture was very plain. For a good picture or 2 hung on the walls, books filled the recesses, chrysanthemums and Christmas roses bloomed in the windows, and a pleasant atmosphere of home peace pervaded it. Margaret, the eldest of the 4, was 16 and very pretty, plump and fair, with large eyes, plenty of soft brown hair, a sweet mouth, and white hands, of which was rather vain. 15-year-old Jo was very tall, thin, and brown, and reminded one of a colt, for she had never seemed to know what to do with her long limbs, which were very much in her way. She had a decided mouth, a comical nose, and sharp gray eyes, which appeared to see everything, and were by turns fierce, funny, or thoughtful. Her long, thick hair was her one beauty. It was usually bundled in a net to be out of her way. Round shoulders had Jo, big hands and feet, a flyaway look to her clothes, and the uncomfortable appearance of a girl who was rapidly shooting up into a woman and didn't like it. Elizabeth, or Beth, as everyone called her, was a rosy, smooth-haired, bright-eyed girl of 13, with a shy manner, a timid voice, and a peaceful expression, which was seldom disturbed. Her father called her Little Miss Tranquility, and the name suited her excellently, for she seemed to live in a happy world of her own, only venturing out to meet a few whom she trusted and loved. Amy, though the youngest, was the most important person, in her own opinion at least. A regular snow maiden with blue eyes, yellow hair curling on her shoulders, pale and slender, always carrying herself like a young lady mindful of her manners. What the characters of the 4 sisters were, we will leave to be found out. The clock struck 6, and having swept the hearth, Beth put a pair of slippers down to warm. Somehow the sight of the old shoes had a good effect on the girls, for Mother was coming, and everyone brightened to welcome her. Meg stopped lecturing and lit the lamp. Amy got out of the easy chair without being asked, and Jo forgot how tired she was as she sat up to hold the slippers near the hern. These are worn out. Mom must have a new pair. I thought I'd get her some with my $1, said Beth. No, I shall, cried Amy. I'm the oldest, began Meg, but Jo cut in with a decided, I'm the man of the family now, and I shall provide slippers, for he told me to take special care of Mother while she was gone. I'll tell you what we'll do, said Beth. Let's each get something for her for Christmas, and not get anything for ourselves. That's like you, dear. What will we get? Exclaimed Jo. Everyone thought for a minute. Then Meg announced, as if the idea was suggested by the sight of her own hands, I will give her a pair of gloves. Army shoes, best to be had, said Joe. Handkerchiefs, all hem, said Beth. A bottle of cologne. She likes it and it won't cost much, and I'll have something left to buy for me, said Amy. How will we give these things? Put them on the table and bring her in and see the open bundles. Don't you remember how we used to do it for our birthdays, answered Joe. I used to be so frightened when it was my turn to sit in the chair with a crown on and see you all come marching around to give presents and a kiss. I liked the things and the kisses, but it was dreadful to have you sit looking at me, said Beth, who was toasting her face in bread for tea at the same time. Let Marmee think we are getting things for ourselves and then surprise her. We must go shopping tomorrow afternoon, Meg. There is so much to do about the play for Christmas night, Joe said, marching up and down with her hands behind her back and her nose in the air. I don't mean to act any more after this time. I'm getting too old for such things, said Meg, who is as much of a child ever about dressing up frolics. You won't stop, I know. As long as you can trail around in a white gown with your hair down and wear gold paper jewelry, you are the best actress we've got, and there will be an end of everything if you quit the board, said Joe. We ought to rehearse tonight. Come here, Amy, and do that fainting scene, for you are as stiff as a poker in that. I can't help it. I never saw anyone faint, and I don't choose to make myself all black and blue, tumbling flat as you do. If I can go down easily, I'll drop if I can and fall into a chair and be graceful. I don't care if Hugo does come at me with a pistol, returned Amy, who was not as gifted with dramatic power, but was chosen because she was small enough without shrieking by the villain of the piece. Do it this way. Clasp your hands so. Stagger across the room. Cry frantically, Rodrigo, save me, save me. And away went Joe with a melodramatic scream. Amy followed, but she still poked her hands out stiffly, jerked herself along, and then said, Ow! More suggestive of the pins being run into her than fear and anguish. Joe gave a despairing groan, and Meg laughed outright, while Beth let her bread burn as she watched the fun and interest. It's no use. Do as best as you can when the time comes, and if the audience laughs, don't blame me. Come on, Meg. Then things went smoothly, for Don Pedro defied the world in a speech of 2 pages without a single break. Hagar the witch chanted an awful incantation over her kettle of simmering toads with weird effect. Rodrigo rent his chains, sundered manfully, and Hugo died in agonies of remorse with a wild ha-ha. It's the best we've had yet, Meg said, as the dead villain sat up and rubbed his elbows. I don't see how you can write and act such splendid things, Joe. You're Shakespeare, exclaimed Beth, who firmly believed that her sisters were gifted with wonderful genius in all things. Not quite, said Joe. I do think the witch's curse and operatic tragedy is rather a nice thing. But I'd like to try Macbeth if only we had a trapdoor for Banquo. I always wanted to do the killing part. Is that a dagger I see before me? She muttered, rolling her eyes and clutching in the air, as she had seen a famous tragedian do. No, it's the toasting fork, with Mother's shoe on it instead of bread. Best stage struck, cried Meg, and the rehearsal ended with a burst of laughter. Glad to find you so merry, my girl, said a cheery voice at the door, and actors and audience turned to welcome a tall, motherly lady, with a can I help you look about her, which was truly delightful. She was not a particularly handsome person, but mothers are always lovely to their children, and the girls caught a gray cloak and unfashionable bonnet covered the most splendid woman in the world. Well, dearies, how have you got on today? There was so much to do, getting boxes ready for tomorrow, that I didn't come home to dinner. Has anyone called, Beth? How is your cold, Meg? Joe, you look tired to death. Come and kiss me. While making these maternal inquiries, Miss March got off her wet things, her warm slippers on, and sitting down in her easy chair, drew Amy onto her lap, preparing to enjoy the happiest hour of her busy day. The girls flew about, trying to make things comfortable, each in her own way. Meg arranged the tea table, Joe brought wood and set chairs, dropping, overturning, and clattering everything she touched. Beth trotted to and fro between the parlor and the kitchen, quiet and busy, while Amy gave directions to everyone as she sat with her hands folded. As they gathered about the table, Miss March said with a particular happy face, I've got a treat for you after supper. A quick, bright smile went around like a streak of sunshine. Beth clapped her hands, regardless of the hot biscuit she held. Joe tossed her napkin. A letter, 3 cheers for Father. Yes, it's a nice long letter. He is well, and thinks he shall get through the cold season better than we feared. He sends all sorts of loving wishes for Christmas, and a special message for you girls, said Miss March, patting her pocket as if she had a treasure there. Hurry and get done. Don't stop your quirk, little finger, and simper over your plate, Amy, cried Jo, choking on her tea and dropping her bread, buttered side down, on the carpet in her haste to get at the treat. Beth ate no more, but crept away to sit in her shadowy corner and brood over the delight to come till the others were ready. I think it was so splendid of Father to go as a chaplain when he was too old to be drafted and not strong enough to be a soldier, said Meg. Don't I wish I could go as a drummer. Vivian, what is his name? Or a nurse, so I could be near him and help him, said Jo with a groan. It must be very disagreeable to sleep in a tent, eat all sorts of bad-tasting things, and drink out of a tin mug, sighed Amy. When will he come home, Mom? Asked Beth with a quiver in her voice. Not for many months, dear, unless he's sick. He will stay and do his work faithfully as long as he can. And we won't ask for him to be back a minute sooner than he can be spared. Now come and hear the letter. They all drew to the fire, Mother in a big chair with Beth at her feet, Meg and Amy perched on either arm of the chair, and Jo leaning back where no one could see any sign of emotion if the letter happened to be touching. Very few letters were written in those hard times that were not touching, especially those which fathers sent home. In this one was said of the hardship endured, the dangers faced, of homesick conquered. It was cheerful, hopeful, full of lively descriptions of camp life, marches, and military news. Only at the end did the writer's heart overflow with fatherly love, longing for the little girls at home. Give them all my dear love and a kiss. Tell them I think of them day by day, pray for them by night, and find my best comfort in their affection at all times. A year seems very long to wait before I see them, but remind them while we wait we all may work, so that these hard days need not be wasted. I know they will remember all I said to them, that they will be loving children to you, will do their duty faithfully, fight their bosom enemy bravely, and conquer themselves so beautifully, that when I come back to them, I may be fonder and prouder than ever of my little women. Everybody sniffed when they came to that part. Jo wasn't ashamed of the great tear that dropped to the end of her nose, and Amy never minded the crumpling of her curls as she hid her face on her mother's shoulder and sobbed, I am a selfish girl. I will truly be better so he mayn't be disappointed in me. We all will, cried Meg. I think too much of my looks and hate to work, but I won't any more if I can help it. I'll try and be what he loves to call me, a little woman, and not be rough and wild. I'll do my duty here instead of wanting to do something else, said Jo, thinking that keeping her temper at home was much harder than facing a rebel or two down south. Beth said nothing, but wiped away her tear with a blue army sock, and began to knit with all of her might, losing no time in doing the duty that lay nearest her, while she resolved in her quiet little soul to be all her father hoped to find her when the year brought around the happy coming home. Miss March broke the silence that followed Jo's words by saying, Do you remember how you used to play Pilgrim's Progress when you were little things? Nothing delighted you more than to have me tie my piece bags on your backs for burden, give you hats and sticks and rolls of paper, and let you travel through the house from the cellar, which was the city of destruction, up to the housetop, where you had all the lovely things you could collect to make a celestial city. What fun it was, especially going by the lions, fighting Apollyon, passing through the valley where the hobgoblins were, said Jo. I liked the place where the bundles fell off and tumbled downstairs, said Meg. My favorite part was when we came out on the flat roof where flowers and arbors and pretty things were, and all stood and sang for joy up in the sunshine, said Beth, smiling, as if that pleasant moment had come back to her. I don't remember much about it except that I was afraid of the cellar, the dark entry, and always liked the cake and milk we had at the top. If I wasn't too old for such things, I'd play it over again, said Amy, who began to talk of renouncing childish things at the mature age of 12. We are never too old for this, my dear, because it is a play. We are playing all the time, one way or another. Our burdens are here, our road is before us. The longing for goodness and happiness is the guide that leads us through many troubles and mistakes to the peace which is a true celestial city. Now, my little pilgrims, suppose you begin again, not in play, but in earnest, to see how far on you can get before Father comes home. Really, Mother? Where are our bundles? Asked Amy, who is a very literal young lady. Each of you told what burden yours was now, except Beth. I rather think she hasn't gotten any, says Mother. I have. Mine is dishes, and envying girls with nice pianos, and being afraid of people. Beth's bundle was such a funny one that everyone wanted to laugh. But nobody did, for it would have hurt her feelings. Let's do it, Meg said thoughtfully. It's only another name for trying to be good, and the story may help us, for though we do not want to be good, it's hard work, and we forget and don't do our best. We're in the slough of despond tonight, and Mother came and pulled us out and helped us in the book. We ought to have our roll of directions like Christian. What shall we do about that? Asked Joe, delighted with the fancy which lent to a little romance of a very dull task of doing her duty. Look under your pillows Christmas morning, and you will find your guidebook, said Miss March. They talked over the new plan while Hannah cleared the table. Then out came the 4 little work baskets, and needles flew as the girls made sheets for Aunt March. It was uninteresting sewing, but tonight no one grumbled. They adopted Joe's plan of dividing the long seams into 4 parts and calling them Europe, Asia, Africa, and America. That way they got on capitally, especially when they talked about different countries as they stitched their way right through them. At 9 they stopped their work and sang, as usual, before they went to bed. No one but Beth could get much music out of the old piano, but she had a way of softly touching the yellow keys and making pleasant accompaniment to simple songs they sang. Meg had a voice like a flute, and she and Mother led the little choir. Amy chirped like a cricket, and Jo wandered through the air at her own sweet will, always coming out at the wrong place with a croak or a quaver that spoiled the most pensive tune. They had always done this from the time they could list Crinkle, Crinkle, It'll Star. It had become a household custom, for the mother was a born singer. The first sound in the morning was her voice, as she went about the house singing like a lark, and the last sound at night was the same cheery sound, for the girls had never grown too old for a familiar lullaby.